Look at this man. I bet he stole those tattoos from a prison yard. The words sliced through the air in flawless English, crisp and calculated, cutting across the white linen tablecloth like a knife through silk. Marcus Vane didn't bother moderating his volume. Why would he? To him, the tattooed Korean man sitting across from his employee was just another cautionary tale, as incapable of threatening his empire as the decorative orchid centerpiece between the wine glasses. Jin remained perfectly still. His fingers rested loosely on the stem of his water glass, controlled and deliberate. His face revealed nothing. "Tiana, seriously," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with theatrical concern as he addressed the black woman seated beside the tattooed man. "This is who you're wasting your potential on, a street artist who probably can't afford the appetizers." The other executives at nearby tables pretended not to listen, but their eyes flickered with that particular brand of wealthy curiosity, the kind that feeds on other people's humiliation. If you're loving this story of hidden identity and justice, hit that like button, subscribe to Mafia Moonlight Tailies, drop a comment below, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Now back to the story. La Période was the most exclusive French restaurant in Seoul. Baroque mirrors, imported Bordeaux by the bottle, a reservation list that required either connections or a corporate card with no limit. It was Friday, 8:30 p.m., and the dining room glowed with the kind of people who measured their worth in quarterly earnings and square footage. Tiana Hayes was 29 years old. She had worked at Vane Marketing for 3 years, climbed from junior coordinator to senior executive through sheer brilliance and relentless work. To Marcus Vane and men like him, she was talented but controllable. A black woman in a white blazer, natural hair styled into professional elegance, ambition carefully measured to never outshine her superiors, visible enough to check diversity boxes, invisible enough not to threaten the hierarchy. "Marcus," Tiana said quietly, her voice steady but strained, "this is a personal dinner, I don't think." Marcus held up a manicured hand, cutting her off with the gesture of someone who had never been interrupted in his life. Marcus Vane was the CEO of Vane Marketing Group, a firm valued at $340 million. At 47, he wore his authority like his Tom Ford suit, perfectly tailored and impossible to miss. Slicked back hair, Rolex Daytona, the posture of a man who had built his empire by stepping on people who couldn't fight back. He came to La Période every month to close deals, impress clients, and remind his employees exactly who controlled their futures. "Tiana, we're about to sign the biggest contract in the company's history," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease. "The Choi Group logistics deal, 7 figures minimum. I need my executives focused, professional, and frankly, dadding within their tax bracket." He turned his attention to Jin, looking him up and down with the same expression someone might use when inspecting spoiled fruit. "No offense, buddy," Marcus said, his tone suggesting he meant maximum offense, "but those tattoos, that thrift store jacket, the whole tortured artist thing, it doesn't exactly scream executive boyfriend material. Tiana's going places. You're painting on street corners." The nearby tables had gone completely quiet now. Every eye in the room tracked the scene like spectators at a public execution. Jin still hadn't moved. He sat with the perfect stillness of someone who had learned long ago how to control every muscle, every breath, every flicker of emotion. But something in his eyes shifted. Not fear, not embarrassment. Something Marcus Vane, in all his arrogance, couldn't identify. Then Jin spoke, his voice low and calm, with just the faintest trace of an accent. "Is that right?" Marcus smiled, mistaking Jin's restraint for weakness. "Look, I'm actually trying to help you here," Marcus said, gesturing grandly with his wine glass. "Tiana's brilliant, driven. She's going to be a partner in my firm someday if she plays her cards right, but she can't afford distractions. And frankly, she deserves someone who can take her to places like this without checking the menu prices first." What Marcus Vane didn't know was that Jin had just memorized every word he said, and that the man he was mocking, the poor artist in the worn leather jacket and ink-covered hands, was not who he appeared to be at all. Because 6 months ago, Jin wasn't sketching portraits in the Hongdae district of Seoul. He was Choi Jin-hyuk, the ruthless head of one of South Korea's most powerful crime syndicates, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and back alleys alike. Tiana reached across the table, her hand finding Jin's. Her eyes were filled with something between fury and heartbreak. "Marcus, I think you should leave," she said quietly. Marcus laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Leave? Tiana, honey, I'm trying to save your career here. You have a choice to make. Him," he pointed at Jin with open disdain, "or your future at Vane Marketing. Because I'll be honest, if this is your judgment in personal matters, I have serious questions about your professional judgment too." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Jin's fingers, still resting on the water glass, tightened almost imperceptibly. The artist's slouch disappeared from his shoulders. His posture shifted just slightly into something else entirely. Something dangerous. Marcus Vane had no idea he was about to meet the real Jin. And when he did, his entire world would collapse in a single phone call. What Marcus couldn't know, what no one in that restaurant knew, was exactly who was sitting at that corner table, wearing a second-hand jacket and fake humility like a disguise. 6 months earlier, Choi Jin-hyuk stood in his penthouse office overlooking the Seoul skyline, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath him. From this height, everything looked peaceful, beautiful even. He knew better. At 34, Jin controlled an empire built on fear, loyalty, and blood. The Choi Syndicate ran logistics operations that moved everything from legitimate cargo to things customs officials were paid handsomely not to see. 37 businesses served as fronts. 2 politicians sat in his pocket. 5 rival organizations had tried to take his territory in the past decade. All 5 had failed. Jin was good at what he did, terrifyingly good. But standing there, whiskey in hand, watching his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, he felt nothing. Just the hollow echo of power that had stopped meaning anything years ago. His phone buzzed. Another message from Min Seo, the actress he'd been seeing, or pretending to see. She wanted to be photographed with him at some gallery opening, wanted to be seen on the arm of the mysterious Choi Jin-hyuk, wanted whatever proximity to power could give her Instagram followers. She didn't know him, didn't want to. Nobody did. Everyone who approached Jin saw the same thing, dollar signs and connections. Women wanted his wealth. Business partners wanted his influence. Even his own lieutenants measured their loyalty in won and opportunities for advancement. When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen just a man? Jin set down his glass and made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew what he really was. He was going to disappear. 3 days later, Choi Jin-hyuk ceased to exist in the public eye. He delegated operations to his most trusted underboss, a cold-eyed strategist named Kang who had been running day-to-day operations for years anyway. He moved out of his penthouse and into a tiny studio apartment in Hongdae, Seoul's artistic district, where the streets smelled like coffee and spray paint instead of expensive cologne and desperation. He became Jin, just Jin. No surname, no history, a struggling artist trying to make it with nothing but talent and hope. He bought cheap clothes from second-hand shops, let his carefully styled hair fall naturally across his forehead, and spent his days sketching portraits of tourists and lovers in the street markets. His tattoos, which had once marked him as someone dangerous, now just made him look like another rebellious creative trying to find meaning in art. For the first time in 15 years, people looked through him instead of at him, and it was liberating. The woman selling tteokbokki at the corner stand called him that sweet artist boy and gave him extra portions. The elderly man who ran the art supply shop talked to him about brushwork and perspective, not profit margins and territory. A group of actual struggling artists invited him to their shared studio space, accepting him as one of their own. Nobody knew his name, his real name. Nobody wanted anything from him except his company, his thoughts, his laugh over cheap soju at 2 a.m. For 2 months, Jin lived like a ghost in his own city, finally breathing freely for the first time since childhood. And then he met Tiana Hayes, and everything changed. She appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, when the Hongdae streets were thick with cherry blossoms and the smell of street food. Jin was set up at his usual corner near the indie bookstore, sketching portraits for whatever people wanted to pay. Tiana Hayes walked past him 3 times before stopping. Jin noticed her the first time. Hard not to. She moved through the crowd with purpose, a black woman in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, completely out of place among the art students and bohemian wanderers. She carried herself like someone who had fought for every inch of respect she'd earned and wasn't about to apologize for taking up space. The second time she passed, she slowed down, glancing at his work displayed on the easel beside him. The third time, she stopped completely. "These are really good," she said in accented but clear Korean. Jin looked up, genuinely surprised. Most foreigners in Hongdae stuck to English, expecting locals to accommodate them. "Thank you," he replied in Korean, then switched to English when he caught the slight American inflection in her pronunciation. "You're not just being polite." "I don't do polite when it comes to art," Tiana said, crouching down to examine a charcoal sketch of an elderly couple he'd drawn the day before. "I do honest, and this captures something real. The way they're looking at each other, it's not staged romance. It's lived-in love. 40 years of dishes and arguments and still choosing each other." Jin felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had actually seen his work, really seen it? "You have a good eye," he said. "I have a trained eye," she corrected, but she was smiling. "Art history minor at Howard University. Completely impractical degree that my grandmother said would leave me starving. Turns out she was half right. I'm in marketing now, but I still know good work when I see it." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her pants. "How much for a portrait?" "Whatever you think it's worth after I'm done." Tiana raised an eyebrow. "That's either very confident or very desperate." "Maybe both," Jin said, surprising himself with the honesty. She laughed, a genuine sound that made passers-by turn and smile without knowing why. "All right, artist, show me what you've got." She sat on the wooden stool he kept for clients, and Jin began to sketch. But instead of the usual polite silence, Tiana talked. About her job at Vane Marketing, about missing her grandmother back in the States, about how Seoul wasn't what she'd expected, but somehow felt more honest than the corporate world she'd left behind in San Francisco. Jin found himself talking too, not about the syndicate or the empire or the violence, about art and loneliness and the strange freedom of being nobody in a city of millions. When he finished the sketch 40 minutes later, Tiana studied it in silence. "You drew me tired," she finally said. "You are tired?" "Yeah." She looked at him differently then, like she was seeing past the charcoal-stained fingers and worn jacket. "Yeah, I am." She paid him double what he usually charged, and before she left, she asked if he'd be there next Tuesday. Jin said yes, before he could think better of it. That was how it started. Tiana's phone buzzed during their 4th Tuesday together. Jin was teaching her basic sketching techniques, his hand guiding hers across the paper, when her expression shifted from relaxed to tense in an instant. "Damn it," she muttered, reading the message. "Bad news. Marcus Vane, my boss." She showed him the screen. "Mandatory dinner Friday night at La Période. He's calling it a team-building opportunity, but really it's just him showing off for potential clients." Jin recognized the name of the restaurant. He'd been there twice in his previous life, back when Choi Jin-hyuk needed to be seen in the right places with the right people. "You don't want to go," he observed. "I despise these things." Tiana set down the charcoal with more force than necessary. "Marcus turns every dinner into a performance. He humiliates the servers, sends back wine that's perfectly fine just to flex, and spends the whole night reminding everyone at the table exactly who signs their paychecks." Sounds delightful. "He's been worse lately. We're trying to land this massive contract with some logistics company, the Choi Group. Marcus is obsessed with it. 7-figure deal that would basically double our revenue. Ever since the negotiations started, he's been unbearable. More controlling, more paranoid about everyone's professional image. Jin's hand stilled on the sketchpad. The Choi Group, his company, or rather, the legitimate face of his empire that handled actual legal logistics contracts. "And you have to go?" he asked carefully. "If I want to keep my job, yes," Tiana sighed, leaning back against the brick wall behind them. Marcus made it clear, all senior executives are required to attend. He wants to show the clients that we're a cohesive, elite team. Translation: he wants us there as props for his ego. Jin had been to 100 dinners like that. He'd hosted them. Watching men like Marcus Vane perform dominance rituals while their employees smiled through gritted teeth, knowing their mortgages depended on their compliance. "I could come with you," Jin offered, the words out before he'd fully thought them through. Tiana looked at him, surprised. "To La Période, Jin, that place is. It's not cheap. I can manage one fancy dinner." "It's not just about the money, it's Marcus. He'll be awful. He judges everyone, and he's especially cruel about people he thinks are beneath him." She hesitated. "I don't want you to have to deal with that." Something in Jin's chest tightened. She was trying to protect him. This fierce, brilliant woman who barely knew him was worried about his feelings. "I've dealt with worse than some corporate bully," Jin said, which was true in ways she couldn't imagine. Tiana studied his face for a long moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you. Marcus Vane at dinner is basically a masterclass in everything wrong with corporate culture." Jin squeezed her hand. "I can handle it." He had no idea. He was about to walk straight into a trap of his own making. La Période was exactly as Jin remembered it. Baroque mirrors reflecting candlelight, the soft clink of crystal, the hushed murmur of wealth insulating itself from the ordinary world. He'd worn his best clothes, which meant a slightly less worn leather jacket and jeans without paint stains. Tiana looked stunning in a black dress that somehow made her look both powerful and elegant. She squeezed his hand as they approached her table, her corporate smile already sliding into place. For the first 20 minutes, they were ignored. Marcus Vane held court at the center table surrounded by his executives and two men in expensive suits who Jin immediately recognized as the Choi Group representatives. They were his employees, though they'd never seen his face. Jin kept his syndicate leadership completely compartmentalized from the legitimate business operations. He watched Marcus perform exactly as Tiana had predicted, sending back perfectly good wine, snapping his fingers at servers, laughing too loudly at his own jokes while his employees smiled on cue. Jin felt Tiana tense beside him every time Marcus's voice carried across the room. Then Marcus noticed them. Jin saw the exact moment it happened. Marcus's gaze swept the dining room in that proprietary way powerful men survey their territory, and his eyes landed on Tiana, then shifted to Jin, and stopped. Marcus excused himself from his table and walked toward them with the confident stride of someone who'd never been told to mind his own business. "Tiana," Marcus said, his voice warm but his eyes cold. "I didn't realize you were bringing a guest." "Marcus, this is Jin. Jin, my boss, Marcus Vane." Marcus didn't offer his hand. Instead, he stared at Jin's tattoos, visible where they crawled up his neck and across his knuckles. His lip curled slightly. "Interesting look," Marcus said, loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "Very. Urban, are those real or temporary?" "Real," Jin said evenly. "Huh," Marcus tilted his head with exaggerated curiosity. "Look at this guy, Tiana. I bet he stole those tattoos from a prison yard." Several executives at Marcus's table turned to watch. A woman in pearls covered her mouth, pretending to cough but clearly smirking. Tiana's hand tightened on her wine glass. "Marcus, that's—" "I'm just making an observation." Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false innocence. "Those tattoos, that thrift store jacket, the whole vibe, it's very authentic." He said the word like it was something distasteful. "What do you do, Jin? Let me guess. Tattoo artist? No, wait. Street artist, right? the kind who needs permission to paint on other people's walls. Jin remained perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. Inside, every instinct he'd honed over 15 years of running a criminal empire screamed at him to put this man in his place. But he'd promised himself when he became just Jin that he'd leave that part of himself behind. "I sketch portraits," Jin said quietly, "in Hongdae." Marcus's smile widened like a predator scenting blood. "Of course you do." Marcus pulled out the empty chair at their table and sat down without being invited. He leaned back with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. "Tiana, we need to talk about your judgment," Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone of manufactured concern. "About your professional trajectory." "This is a personal dinner, Marcus," Tiana said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "My personal life has nothing to do with my work." "Doesn't it, though?" Marcus gestured at Jin like he was evidence in a trial. "You're a senior executive at Vane Marketing. You represent the company. When clients see you, when colleagues see you, they're seeing our brand, our standards." Jin watched Tiana's jaw clench. He could feel the fury radiating off her in waves. "My work speaks for itself," she said. "Your work is excellent. That's not what I'm questioning." Marcus leaned forward, dropping his voice to a theatrical whisper that still carried to nearby tables. "I'm questioning whether you have the discernment necessary for partnership. Because frankly, Tiana, the company you keep reflects on the company you work for." "You're out of line," Tiana said. "Am I?" Marcus straightened, his mask of concern dissolving into open condescension. "Look, I'm trying to help you here. You're brilliant. Driven, you could be a partner in this firm, but you can't afford distractions, and you certainly can't afford to be seen with." He paused, looking Jin up and down with theatrical disgust. "Street urchins who probably can't afford the appetizers at places like this." Jin's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his water glass. The artist's posture he'd maintained for 6 months was becoming harder to hold. "That's enough," Tiana said, starting to stand. "Sit down." Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. Not a request, a command. "We're not finished. The Choi Group deal closes next week. 7 figures minimum. I need my executives focused, professional, and frankly, dadding within their tax bracket." He turned his full attention to Jin now, his contempt undisguised. "No offense, buddy, but those tattoos, that jacket, the whole tortured artist routine, it screams poor judgment. Tiana's going places. You're painting portraits for pocket change. See the disconnect." The dining room had gone completely silent. Every executive, every server, every patron was watching the public humiliation unfold. "Tiana, you have a choice to make," Marcus said, standing up and straightening his Tom Ford suit. "Him or your future at Vane Marketing. Because I'll be honest, if this is your judgment in personal matters, I have serious questions about your professional judgment too. Partners need to demonstrate excellence in all aspects of their lives. All aspects." The threat hung in the air, crystal clear. Marcus smiled, satisfied with his performance. "Think about it. I'll expect your answer Monday morning." He walked back to his table, where the Choi Group representatives were watching with uncomfortable expressions. Jin hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. But something in his eyes had changed completely. Tiana was shaking, not with fear, with rage. "Jin, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We should leave. I'll deal with Marcus on Monday. I'll find another job. I'm not going to." "No," Jin said quietly. Something in his voice made Tiana stop mid-sentence. Jin set down his water glass with deliberate precision. The slight tremor that had been in his hands, the nervous energy of a struggling artist out of his depth, had vanished completely. He stood up. The change was immediate and unmistakable. The slouch disappeared from his shoulders. His posture shifted into something else entirely, something that made the nearby servers instinctively step back. His head lifted, and suddenly he wasn't looking at the room. He was surveying it, assessing, calculating. Every person who'd been watching the humiliation now felt a ripple of confusion. The meek artist they'd pitied moments ago had transformed into something that made their primitive hindbrain whisper warnings. Jin walked toward Marcus's table with slow, measured steps, not the hesitant shuffle of someone uncertain. The controlled approach of someone who'd walked into hostile rooms 100 times and always walked out alive. Marcus noticed him coming and smiled, thinking Jin was about to make a scene he could use to further embarrass Tiana. "Come to apologize," Marcus said loudly, playing to his audience. "Smart move. Maybe there's hope for you yet." Jin stopped at the edge of the table. Up close, the two Choi Group representatives could see his face clearly for the first time. One of them went pale. The other's wine glass froze halfway to his lips. "Mr. Vane," Jin said, his voice completely different now. No trace of the soft-spoken artist remained. This voice carried command, authority, the weight of someone who'd given orders that moved millions of dollars and ended lives. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus frowned, confused by the shift but still confident in his superiority. "What misunderstanding? That you're out of your league. That Tiana deserves better than some street." "About who I am," Jin interrupted. In his former life, no one interrupted Choi Jin-hyuk. The fact that he was allowing this conversation to continue at all was a courtesy Marcus didn't deserve. Jin pulled out his phone with the unhurried movement of someone who had all the time in the world, because time bent to his will, not the other way around. The two Choi Group representatives were standing now, their faces masks of barely controlled panic. "Sir," one of them said in Korean, his voice cracking. "Sir, we didn't know." "Sit down," Jin said in Korean, not even looking at them. They sat immediately. Marcus's smile flickered. Something was wrong, but his ego wouldn't let him see it yet. "What's going on?" Marcus demanded. Jin looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus Vane finally understood what prey felt like. "I'm making a phone call," Jin said. "You should listen carefully." Jin dialed a number from memory. The call connected on the first ring. "Kang," Jin said in Korean, his voice cold and precise. "The Vane marketing contract. Cancel it, immediately." "Sir," even over the phone, his underboss's surprise was evident. "We're 3 days from signing. Everything's finalized." "I don't care. Cancel it. Blacklist the company. Make sure every firm we work with knows Vane marketing is not to be touched." Marcus had gone very still, his face draining of color as the words penetrated his arrogance. "And Kang, freeze all of Marcus Vane's personal accounts. Every investment, every credit line that traces back to our financial networks. I want him to feel what it's like to be poor by morning." Jin ended the call and turned to the Choi Group representatives, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. "You'll return to the office and draft a formal termination letter. The merger is dead. Make sure the board at Vane Marketing knows exactly why." "Yes, Mr. Choi," they said in unison, gathering their things with shaking hands. Jin finally looked at Marcus, who sat frozen in his chair, his mind clearly struggling to process what had just happened. "You wanted to meet the head of Choi Group," Jin said quietly in English. "Congratulations, Marcus. You just humiliated him in front of his girlfriend and threatened her career. How does it feel?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. You're Choi Jin-hyuk," Jin said. "The street urchin whose company was about to make you very, very rich, was." The restaurant had erupted in whispers. Phones were being discreetly pulled out. This would be all over Seoul's business circles by morning. Marcus tried to stand, his legs barely supporting him. "Mr. Choi, I didn't know I would never have." "Get out," Jin said, "before I change my mind about keeping this professional." Marcus stumbled toward the exit, his empire crumbling with every step. Jin turned back to find Tiana standing beside their table, her face unreadable. "Tiana." "Not here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They walked out of La Période in silence. The night air hit them like a slap. Tiana kept walking until they reached a small park 2 blocks away from the stairs and whispers. Then she turned on him. 6 months, she said, and her voice was shaking. 6 months of telling me about your struggle, your poverty, your art. All of it was a lie. Not all of it, Jin said. The art was real, what I felt. What you felt, Tiana laughed, a harsh sound. How am I supposed to know what was real, Jin? Or should I call you Mr. Choi? Or maybe I should ask which other names you've been using. I wanted someone to see me. Not my money, not my power, just me. So you lied. Tiana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You made me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. The words hit Jin harder than any physical blow ever had. He does exist, Jin said quietly. That man in Hongdae, the one who sketched with you every Tuesday, who listened to your stories, who lied about everything else. Jin didn't call Tiana for 3 days. He wanted to, every hour of every day, but he knew she needed space to process what he'd revealed. Instead, he made other calls. On the first day, he called his underboss, Kang, and told him to prepare succession documents. Kang thought he was joking until Jin's tone made it clear he wasn't. On the second day, he met with his lieutenants in a secure location and told them he was stepping down. The room erupted in chaos. Men who'd pledged their loyalty to Choi Jin-hyuk couldn't comprehend why he'd walk away from an empire at the height of his power. For a woman, one of them asked, incredulous. For myself, Jin corrected. The syndicate will continue under Kang's leadership. The legitimate businesses stay legitimate, but I'm done. On the third day, Jin transferred most of his assets into trusts and charitable foundations. He kept enough to live comfortably, but the obscene wealth, the penthouses, the symbols of power, he dismantled them piece by piece. Then he went to find Tiana. She was at her apartment in Gangnam, a modest place she'd rented when she first moved to Seoul. Jin had learned the address months ago, but had never visited, respecting the boundary between his false identity and her real life. She opened the door on the third knock, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture defiant. I don't want your apologies, she said before he could speak. I'm not here to apologize, Jin said. I'm here to show you something. He handed her a folder. Legal documents, all of them dated within the last 72 hours. Transfer of power within the syndicate. Dissolution of holdings. Formal separation from criminal operations. Tiana read through them slowly, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to something Jin couldn't quite identify. What is this? She finally asked. Proof, Jin said. That man you met in Hongdae, the one who sketched portraits and talked about art until 2 a.m. He was real, Tiana. He was the version of me I wish I'd been all along. The version I want to be now. You can't just walk away from that life, Tiana said, but her voice had lost its edge. People like you don't just retire. People like me don't usually have a reason to. Jin stepped closer, his voice soft. I lied about who I was and that was wrong, but I never lied about how I felt. About you, about us, about wanting something real for the first time in my life. Tiana's hands trembled as she held the documents. This is insane. You're walking away from everything. Not everything, Jin said. I'm walking towards something if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long moment, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I fell in love with an artist named Jin, she said, not a crime lord named Choi Jin-hyuk. Then let me be Jin, he said. Just Jin, no empire, no syndicate, just a man who wants to paint and build a life with you. Tiana wiped her eyes, and despite everything, she smiled. You're going to have to earn this back. I know, Jin said. I have time, all the time in the world now. She opened the door wider. Then I guess you should come in.